Let's talk about our guys. This is part two. We're kind of piggybacking off the Our Guys episode, My Guys, as it may be listed, that Bob and Zach did. Hey, let's get into your first My Guy.
Nico Collins. This is my guy this year. It's kind of funny because he wasn't really my guy in the past. I like Nico coming out of Michigan. Size speed combo. It was all there. You knew it was a little raw, so it was going to take a little bit of time to develop. But honestly, his sophomore season, it wasn't that impressive either. And he dealt with injury. That was part of the reason. But last year was the year that he broke out, and by far an incredible season, finishing as a top 12 wide receiver, being linked to now CJ Stroud, who we are all very excited about. He elevated into that alpha tier last year, but he has to do it again this year to prove that he really belongs there. It wasn't like a one-hit wonder, but I'm not worried about that because while Tank Dell is some good competition and Stephon Diggs is there, I'm not too worried about it because CJ Stroud is perfectly capable of having multiple fantasy relevant wide receivers. This isn't like, hey, I need to make sure that my guy's going to have a 30% target share and, it's a bad offense, but with that target share, he's going to be okay. No, Nico Collins is on a really good offense. He's a really good wide receiver with a really good quarterback. Like this stuff all works together. This is the fantasy gold that we're looking for. And I know Stephon Diggs is there, but he's going to have to turn back time if he wants to be the wide receiver one on that team. He is a complementary piece to Nico Collins, to Tank Dell, part of that wide receiver core for sure. Those three are going to be on the field a lot. But Nico Collins, I really do believe, is the number one there and will continue to be the number one there. He was the fifth overall graded wide receiver by PFF last year. Tank Dell was 15th and Stephon Diggs was 19th. So Texans are sitting there with three top 20 graded wide receivers. But 80 receptions, 1,297 yards last year, and 8 touchdowns. Mike, that was 16.2 yards per reception, which is really impressive when you're talking about 80 receptions. And that was only in 15 games. I looked it up. How many other players have had 80 receptions, 1,200 yards, and 8 touchdowns while averaging at least 16 yards per catch? Only 20 other players have ever done this, Mike, ever. Going back to the beginning of, I think it was 1920 is when Pro Football Reference goes back to. And on that list was names like Megatron, Tyreek Hill, T.O., Jamar Chase, A.J. Brown, Larry Fitzgerald, Mike Evans, a bunch of future Hall of Famers or current Hall of Famers. Yeah. No one's done it twice, though. No one's done it twice except for Calvin Johnson. And at that time, he was 26 years old, 28 years old. Nico Collins did last year, 24 years old. I think Nico, with C.J. Stroud now as the quarterback, I don't know if he can have quite that good of a season with the yard per reception so high, but I think he'll have another really good season, over 1,200 yards, 80 receptions.
Did you talk about the ACREC last year?
Oh, I didn't even talk about that. I talked about that so much throughout the offseason. I forgot to even mention that.
6.9.
And how many people were in front of him, Mike?
Well, I'm just looking on PFF. So
well, I'll tell you that was like top 3 in the NFL for anyone that had significant targets.
There you go.
Nico Collins was a yak monster last year. So I'm excited about Nico. Going to be a top 15 wide receiver this year. That's my expectation, even with those additions, with Stephon Diggs, Joe Mixon there. I still think he can be a top 15 guy. At floor, you're talking about a wide receiver 2, but I think he's going to have a better season than that. And he's still accessible because of Stephon Diggs. Cost-wise, I saw him going for JMO in a first. I'd do that deal in an instant. Yeah. DJ Moore, I would move DJ Moore for Nico.
Yeah.
Easily. I'd use him on another guy who's in a crowded wide receiver room. And then Isaiah Pacheco in a second. Maybe a little expensive if you're a contender, need a running back. But otherwise, I think this is a great deal. We're talking about a wide receiver who's only 25 years old and has proven himself already.
Yeah, man, do the deal. And don't forget, with DJ Moore, a lot of people, myself included, believe in Caleb Williams long-term, but you're buying the quarterback. Right now, CJ Stroud, just a better NFL quarterback than Caleb Williams, because Caleb Williams has only played in preseason. We've seen what CJ Stroud can do in the regular season. I love this, Nate. I've been on the Nico bandwagon for quite some time. And let's not forget, he did that in 15 games. He missed 2 games of the calf strain. So pretty impressive for Nico last year. Let's move on. I'm going to talk about another wide receiver, and that's Jacksonville Jaguars wide receiver Brian Thomas Jr. He's 58 on Keep Trade Cut, wide receiver 23. And the last go around of Dynasty Rewind ADP, rookie ADP we had him at the 109. So the back end of the first round is where you're going to be getting a very solid wide receiver. He's got a great opportunity. He's got a good offensive-minded head coach in Doug Peterson. I feel he's a bit more of a savvy route runner than Gabe Davis. He could stretch the field a little bit more than Christian Kirk. He gives the Jaguars a different dynamic than what they have in their other 2 wide receivers. And I think that's important. He already makes NFL catches. Nate, we've seen his tape from LSU. He's getting both feet in, stretching that lanky body of his out. And with his frame, he could be used anywhere on the field. He's lanky, but he's also 6'4". So, and we've seen these guys that are slimmer, but they're tall. They can get the job done.
Mhm.
It's not just about bulk anymore. I do think that maybe not this year he'll be a high-end wide receiver too. Could be a bottom-end wide receiver too, but I think long-term high-end wide receiver too until the Jacksonville Jaguars wide receiver situation figures itself out, because Kirk and Gabe Davis are going to have to leave eventually, but he's going to be a starter on your dynasty roster. That's easy to say. Some trades that I saw: Stephon Diggs in a second. I don't know how exactly I feel about that one, but hey, you just said Stephon Diggs is going to have to go back in time to regain his form. Is it possible? Yes. I think it's unlikely for him this year. Another one, Brock Bowers, straight up, and Luke McCaffrey in a 25 first. So essentially, you're just paying a 25 first because we don't know exactly what Luke McCaffrey is going to be.
Maybe like a
Yep.
4th round pick equivalent or something like that.
Yeah. So
Hmm.
I'm all in on Jacksonville Jaguars wide receiver Brian Thomas. I do not have the shares that I want.
Yeah, I don't have that many shares either. I ended up, going a lot more Jonathan Brooks, or picking up, a falling Drake May or JJ McCarthy in those parts of the draft. This next guy I have really warmed up to over the offseason. I don't have too many shares of him, but I have acquired shares over the past month. Romeo Doubs, wide receiver for the Green Bay Packers, currently 124 overall, wide receiver 47 on Keep Trade Cut, quietly developing into the wide receiver 1 for Jordan Love. Jordan Love can't stop talking about this guy, and neither can the beat reporters who have been covering the training camp for the whole summer. It sounds like Romeo Doubs has really become one of the main targets of this offense, and that means something in an offense that has so many different targets, so much competition for targets. I feel really confident at this point. Romeo Doubs is going to be out there. He's going to see targets. He's going to have consistent work. And when we're looking at the Green Bay Packers wide receiver room, finding consistent work is part of the problem when trying to decipher who's going to be the guy for Jordan Love this year. I think Jayden Reed is still going to do plenty well. I think Jayden Reed and Romeo Doubs can coexist quite well. They did last year. He was wide receiver 37 last year. Jayden Reed was a top 28 wide receiver. I want to say he was like 26 or something like that. So obviously Jordan Love can support a couple of different fantasy wide receivers, and that was with them figuring out the offense. It stalled a little bit in the middle of the year, but came back strong. Last year, 59 receptions, 674 yards, and 8 touchdowns. Definitely found his way into the end zone pretty often. You just look at those raw stats, and it's an okay sophomore season. It's nothing incredible. Didn't even really come close to 1,000 yards, to be honest. But in 2 postseason games, Mike, 10 receptions, 234 yards, and a touchdown. Now, if you want to extrapolate stuff, that would definitely put him at a pace of over 1,000 yards over a 17-game season. I don't think we're going to keep quite at that pace, but I do think that Romeo Doubs will be a 1,000-yard receiver this year. I think it sets him up for a really good season, and I think he's a guy that Jordan Love trusts, which is really important, especially with a guy like Christian Watson out there who has missed a lot of time. Unfortunately, I do feel like Romeo Doubs and his fantasy production does rely a little bit on Christian Watson's health. Compared to, say, Jayden Reed. If Christian Watson's on the field, it's going to take away more from Romeo Doubs than it is a player like Jayden Reed. Jayden Reed and Watson aren't going to have much overlap in plays that are meant for them, in targets that are meant for them. But Doubs and Watson certainly will. They're both bigger body guys. They can get down the field. They can stretch the defense. They play outside. That is something to keep in mind. Maybe if you want to be safer, it's a bit more expensive, go after Jayden Reed. But I do really like Romeo Doubs, and he is accessible. Like I said, I think he can get 1,000 yards. I think he can have a top 30 wide receiver season, so better than last year. Not a guy that's going to be in your wide receiver 2 slot, wide receiver 3 slot, but I think Doubs can develop into a valuable fantasy asset and a great flex play week in and week out. So accessible with Cortland Sutton. I'm seeing Cortland Sutton traded for Romeo Doubs. I'm seeing Jordan Mason because he's the backup for CMC. That's pretty valuable. I'm seeing second-round picks, just second-round picks, 2025, 2026 even for Romeo Doubs. So, I think this is a guy you can still go out and get before it gets more expensive.
I've been talking about him for 2 years. I still believe that's Marvin Mims. I'm going to talk about accessible.
Very accessible.
Right here. He's 188. Keep trade cut. Wide receiver 70. But Nate, here's the thing. He's a starting slot wide receiver for the Denver Broncos, who just might have a quarterback upgrade with Bo Nix over Russell Wilson. We think that right now. We don't know 100%. So we're just going to go into this based on the assumption that he has that. Let's talk a little bit about how Bo Nix utilizes the slot wide receiver. Now, I
Ooh.
understand that this is a different team, different scheme, blah, blah, blah. But we see parallels, quarterbacks doing the same thing one place to the next. Okay. So with Oregon, wide receiver Tez Johnson, by the way, there's a name to keep your 2025 brain. He ran 93.4% of his routes out of the slot. He had 70 catches for 942 yards and 9 touchdowns. Now, if we take 93.4% of those totals, we get 65 receptions, 879 yards, and 9 touchdowns. That's pretty good, especially when you consider that Marvin Mims is coming off a season where he had 22 catches, 377 yards, and 1 touchdown. He was wide receiver 84, but the team was kind of a mess. Hey, Nate, do you remember how good Michael Thomas was with the Saints in the Sean Payton
Yeah,
offense?
pretty good. Pretty good if I remember
From
correctly.
2017 to 2019, he averaged 160 targets with 126 catches, 1,458 yards, and 7 touchdowns. I'm not saying Marvin Mims equals Michael Thomas. I'm not saying Bo Nix equals Drew Brees, but there is some hope here. And I'm not even saying we're going to be close, but for what you're paying right now for this guy, this is a guy who can absolutely outperform his ADP at a cheap cost. Guys like Jacob Cowing, Jaleel McLaughlin, Malik
Mhm.
Washington, Tyrone Tracy, a late third or multiple fourth round picks. And in some trades I saw, he was a throw-in, Nate. He was an afterthought. He was a throw-in for a guy that could potentially end up being a low-end wide receiver too, if given the opportunity and he stays healthy. We've seen the catches that he made when he was at Oklahoma. I think he can do it again. And for this cheap, I'm willing to take the chance.
I think it's a good gamble because it's so cheap. You know, I was kind of into Marvin Mims last year. I really thought he was going to have a good training camp, but we didn't really get a lot of hype out of training camp for Marvin Mims.
No.
I really thought this was going to be like a big year for him, but we haven't got the hype yet. It might still be a breakout. I'm not against it because there's really no one to catch the ball there. He's proven themselves outside of Cortland Sutton. So there's still a huge path of opportunity there for Marvin Mims. And if he takes it, he certainly can be one of the most explosive players in the NFL. So, you know, for this kind of cost or as a throw-in, I'm all for it.
This isn't a trade that I'm making if I'm a contending team and unless I have a ton of draft capital, some things I could play with here. But this is a really, really good trade to make if you're a middle of the pack team, if you're a back end of the league team. You
Mhm.
got to make moves. If you're tired of being in the constant rebuild, you're tired of being in the middle, you have to do something. You just have to. And if you don't have the draft capital to get elite players, you have to go with the guy who you think can outperform his ADP and either be a good solid starter for the future or a guy that you could flip for somebody potentially
Yep.
more consistent. Who do you have next for us?
I got another wide receiver. My guy is Jalen Polk. Currently
Mhm.
128 overall, wide receiver 49. Now, Jalen Polk, I remember the first time I heard Jalen Polk's name, which is kind of my fault that it was so late because I was very well aware of Jalen McMillan and Roma Dunze 3-4 years ago. I drafted Roma Dunze in one of my first C2C drafts. I was excited about the 2 wide receivers they have up there. But I somehow totally missed Polk. And I remember someone from the Discord asking me my thoughts on Jalen Polk. And I was like, you know what? You know, from the brief stuff I've seen, you know, he looks solid, but I haven't really got to dive into him too much. I'm not like too excited about him. And as I got into the film, I got more and more excited just about the all-around ability of Jalen Polk and the fact that he looks so pro-ready. He looked like a professional out there. He
Yeah.
looked like he was ready to step on the NFL field and play on Sundays. And he goes to the Patriots training camp, and everyone who's watched him play over there is saying the same thing, that this guy is ready to go. He is already kind of emerging as their wide receiver 1. It's between him and Demario Douglas, who everyone knows. I love Demario Douglas. I have a ton of Demario Douglas across my leagues as well, maybe just as much as Jahan Dotson. So, you know, I really wanted to go with Demario Douglas as my guy, but I feel like the emergence of Jalen Polk this year is going to be something that we're all going to be paying attention to. And I'm going to be very excited about because I think by the end of this year, Jalen Polk has really solidified himself as the wide receiver 1 in New England. Now, there's always a chance they bring in somebody else to the draft. You know, they still can add to that wide receiver room. They probably are not done adding to the wide receiver room for the future for Drake May. But I think Polk can certainly have a good year this year and continue moving forward to be a very relevant fantasy wide receiver. Plenty of targets to go around, no matter who the quarterback is, because there's not a lot of competition. You know, it's going to be him and Demario Douglas. That's really who much of that offense is going to go through. The other starting wide receiver right now is Tyquan Thornton. Don't
Ooh.
expect much from him. He's there to stretch the field and open up things underneath for the two of them. Hunter Henry is there as well. He'll get some targets. But really, it's Polk, it's Douglas. These guys are going to see their targets. They're going to get good volume, whether from Jacoby Brissett or Drake May. I'm fine with either one because I think Brissett can definitely support a fantasy wide receiver, and Drake May, he has the upside to really have one of these guys really pop off. But I think Polk, with the contested catch ability he showed in college, 50% over his 4-year career on 44 contested catch targets. That's something that he absolutely brings, that physicality, to play outside, to play against NFL cornerbacks. He looks ready to do that. I expect a top 40 season from him and to see kind of a top 24 guy in the second half of the season. When Drake May's in there, he's getting a bit more comfortable. Polk's around the end of his rookie year. I think we're going to see some flashes that make us really excited going into 2025 about what Polk and May can do together. I'm excited about this, and still pretty accessible. All these players I'm talking about are values. Mike, we just did a rookie draft. This last rookie draft of the year. It's pretty late, and I picked up Jalen Polk in the 3rd round.
That's beautiful.
It's insane that he's still available there. I was picking him up at the 204 early in the offseason right after the draft. Now I'm picking him up at the 301. I'm pretty excited about that. So, send some 3rd round picks. I don't think it's going to make it work, but send some 3rd round picks, 2 3rd round picks. I don't think you're getting any deal with that, but try it. Why not? But player-wise, knock on some doors. But player-wise, Zamir White, Justin Fields, Curtis Samuel, some players I saw that I would trade for Jalen Polk, Zach Moss in a 3rd, maybe just Zach Moss. Zach Moss was listed as the starter on the Bengals depth chart they released today. So you might be able to just move Zach Moss straight up to a contender for Polk. Chase Brown, same backfield, also someone you can move for Jalen Polk. You can move a 2nd round pick for Jalen Polk too. I'm totally fine with that. Trading a second way next year for a guy like that, I think he'll be worth more than a second next year. So I think it's a good investment.
Let's talk about one running back, and that's Chicago Bears running back DeAndre Swift. He's 106 on Keep Trade Cut, running back 23, so he's being valued as a low-end running back too. Last year, he missed his fewest games in his career, 1 due to an illness. He missed 3 in 22 and 4 in 2021. We knew he was a good receiving back in Detroit, but in Philadelphia, he showed that he can be a primary ball carrier. He's going to be that in Chicago as well. And I think he could be both in Chicago, primary ball carrier and a receiving back. He can help Caleb Williams mature as a quarterback. That's very important. Last year, he had 229 carries, 1,049 yards, 5 touchdowns, 39 receptions, 214 yards and 1 touchdown. He was running back 23 in the season. Yes, I understand he's being valued as what he finished last year. However, I think he can push to be a running back 1. Khalil Herbert, Roshan Johnson, they're still there. But they're looking right now to just be high-end backups. I don't think they're going to take much from DeAndre Swift. I think he's going to get more volume overall this year in Chicago than he did last year in Philadelphia, especially in the receiving game.
Especially on the goal line.
Yeah, that too. I don't know if Caleb Williams, if they're going to want him running the ball very much. I'm going to say probably not. Here's some trades I saw for good old DeAndre Swift. We got Joe Mixon for Swift in a 2nd. Interesting one right there. Okay. Dak Prescott for Geno Smith and DeAndre Swift.
Okay.
Bit of a quarterback downgrade,
but I love the Mixon for Swift in a 2nd. I think Mixon and Swift are pretty even. Value-wise, so if you can get a 2nd on top of that, way to go.
Yeah, I saw a couple trades. Tyler Lockett straight up and a 25 first straight up.
Tyler Lockett straight up is ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, you think about it. Tyler Lockett still could have more time in the NFL than DeAndre Swift just because of that position, but I think DeAndre Swift will have more relevant time left in the NFL. Than
also, I think Lockett's going to be on his way out eventually. I think he's only got probably 2 or 3 years left, and that's not even saying all of them with the Seahawks. We'll see.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, he'll definitely be somewhere. He's good enough to hang around for a while. Those are our guys, aka my guys. So just make sure you go ahead, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you guys can and wherever you listen. Try out our Patreon 1 week for free. Patreon.com/Dynasty Rankings. Buy yourself some awesome merch. But until then, everybody, for Nate, I'm Mike. Thank you for listening.